I'm Jane Hirshfield, and you are watching Time to Connect.
Jane Hirshfield, thank you so much for taking the time to connect. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
You know, I have been a fan of yours for many years, more years than either one of us probably would like to count. And it's a little surreal having you here with me. I really appreciate it. I've been so fortunate to get such amazing guests on this podcast. I don't know how it's happening, but I'm just really grateful, and it's an honor to have you. So thank you so much. I'm not going to take more than an hour of your time here. I've got so much. We could spend 3 hours from my perspective, but I won't do that to you. Are you in Marin?
I am on the hem of Mount Tamalpais, which is our local wonderful mountain. And you are seeing me in sunlight, but last night was the first real rain of the rainy season, and the entire biosphere is reveling in having some moisture back in the ground, on the leaves, in the air.
Nice. Well, I'm down here in Texas where it's still 90 degrees and
Ah.
humid and not fun. But uh, so it's I always said Mount Tamalpais. I've done some hiking around there, but it's not Mount Tamalpais.
Yeah, or if you want to make it easier on yourself, just Mount Tam.
Yeah,
That's what we usually say, Mount Tam.
yeah, nice. And I've done a little reading about you and listened to some of your podcasts and interviews and whatnot. I know that you grew up in New York City, and was it 1974 you drove the red Dodge hippie van out to San Francisco?
It was, with tie-dyed curtains, wall-to-wall carpeting, and a built-in bed.
Oh, I would have been so jealous. I graduated high school in 74. I think you're probably 3 years older than me. Uh,
Probably, yeah.
and oh gosh, that would have been a dream come true for me at that time. What drove you to make that trip, to move from New York to San Francisco?
Well, when I graduated from college, my first work with my college boyfriend was farm labor. So we worked on an amazing farm in New Jersey, it had been in that family for 6 generations. And the man we worked for was the last son to try to make a go of it. And it was just an extraordinary experience because it was multi-crop. It was an old-fashioned farm with a farm stand with peach trees, apple trees, pumpkins, corn, harvesting the older neighbors' fruit trees who couldn't do it anymore. But after that year was over, my beloved boyfriend said he was going to South America, and no, I was not invited along,
Oh,
and so I had to figure out my life on my own. And I thought I was driving across country to look for a place I wanted to live, get a job as a waitress, write poems. But I had in the back of my mind also, I had some interest in Zen particularly, and Buddhism in general, from things that I had been mostly reading for many years. And I knew that the only Zen monastery that existed then in America was Tassajara in the mountains inland from Big Sur in the middle of the Ventana Wilderness. And so when I reached California on my wanderings looking for the beautiful place to live, I thought, oh, I'll check that out. And I won't tell the full story, but I went in, I stayed for a week. And by the end of the week, I thought, I'll stay for a few months till I learn what this Buddhism business is all about. And of course, after a few months, you know that you know nothing about what this Buddhism business might all be about, and that might even be the wrong description. And I ended up staying, Zen Center has 3 different training places, and I ended up between the 3 of them in formal training for 8 years.
mhm. And is it true that you only wrote one poem in that 8 years?
Only in the 3 years at the monastery. So when I was in the monastery, the rule then was you did absolutely nothing except practice Zen. Back in those days, people weren't even supposed to be doing yoga, which, Zen students sitting in that posture all day, they really need to stretch a little.
Mm.
But yeah, I was a very obedient young soul, and the one poem that I wrote, I was simply mugged by it early one morning before Zazen, when I was sitting out on the front, hardly large, postage stamp sized deck of the cabin I was living in that year, drinking a little coffee before morning zazen, which was my way every single day I was there. Proper monks drink green tea, but I drank coffee. And a little poem just came and got me. So that was it.
Mm. Yeah, I'm surprised more didn't get you during that time.
Well, it was very intentional that especially when sitting in meditation, I knew from the very beginning, if I allowed poems to come to me when I was supposed to be wishing to be sitting zazen,
Mhm.
I would actually never sit zazen. I would just write poems in my head on the cushion. And that is not what I was there to do.
Yeah.
The reason I wanted monastic practice is because it is strict, intense, and in Zen, as opposed to Catholicism, it is not a lifelong commitment. It is a brief period of training. The 3 years that I stayed was the traditional 1,000 days.
Mhm.
And at that time, no one stayed longer, although later people began to. And, time was short, and there was something I really needed to alter my relationship with the world, with myself, with the practice of attention, and other people. A man who went on to become one of the abbots of Zen Center, Norman Fisher, he was there my second year that I was in the monastery, and he wrote all the time. So maybe if I'd done that, I'd have been an abbot. But if I'd been an abbot, I would never have been a poet. So I love that I learned, for one thing, that it is possible to go silent for 3 years and poems will return. I didn't
Ah,
know that they would. I thought they might not.
really?
I was young. That was a big percentage of my life.
Wow.
But I also thought, well, if I don't write poems after this, I will do what presents itself. I was perfectly, aware that I might take a different life course than I had been expecting, and that would have been the right life course because it's what I would have emerged into. But when I emerged, I reemerged into poetry and very, very slowly made my way back into what you might call lay practice, practicing like a normal person living a normal life. But I go one step forward, further. I think of it as something called tea house practice, which is, despite the fact that I'm prattling on about all this in public now, tea house practice is invisible. You are not walking around speaking about Zen using the vocabulary. It is in you, but it is not how you face the world. And I have always preferred, even though, word got out eventually and everybody knows, but my poems are not doctrinal. My poems are the poems of a human life, not of any particular spiritual practice or training. The whole point of Zen is to disappear into what is,
Mhm.
not to walk around wearing a label.
Right. Of course, little did you know you were training your awareness and your attention, which couldn't have a better training for being a poet, right?
Well, I could say that, poetry trained my attention to prepare me for Zen.
Yeah.
Poetry sent me to
Yeah.
Zen, Zen returned me to poetry. And ever since, it just feels to me like the left foot and the right foot of my walking. They're inseparable. You can't label any part of what I do, either this or that. You are the sum of every choice, every action, every word, every emotion you have ever felt is what comes forward in this moment. And none of it stays properly in little compartments, and none of it should.
And I think this is one of the going to be one of the themes of our conversation today. we have to include it all, don't we? We can't
Yes,
we can't live a life chasing after what we want and pushing away what we don't want. It's a recipe for suffering.
that is exactly so. And, I think probably one thing that the young woman in her van, who looked probably pretty courageous going off and doing that, it didn't feel like it took any courage to me, but other people seemed to think that it was a brave thing to do. Um, I think what I knew was that I needed to learn more about attending to this human experience of the world and of my own life's events. And I needed to learn the courage to stay present with them no matter what came. And that is very difficult sometimes. It is difficult today. Um, but that training that you can simply feel whatever arises, think whatever thoughts might intrude on your practice of awareness, and no harm will come to you or anyone else if you are doing that within the embrace of meditation. You're not going to leap up off your cushion and do damage, and nothing will come to you. A monastery is a very protected space, or it should be in the ideal world. It isn't always. We had wildfire come. That was good Zen training. There's a marvelous book about it called Fire Monks, about the next wildfire, which I was there for the beginning of to help and then left. But in 1977, for the Ventana Cone fire, I stayed through the entire thing and helped save the monastery. And, there were a dozen of us in the middle of a wilderness filled with wildfire. And that was one of the most large, and I have to say, since we all survived it, actually quite beautiful events of my life. You don't think of a wildfire as beauty because, if somebody dies in it, the beauty is erased.
Yeah.
But when you walk around a place after it has come through, and all of the trees have embers in their trunks, it is an extraordinary thing. And even beforehand, there are moments when the light changes in unexpected ways, and the world goes quiet because the animals have somehow, somewhere fled, and you're waiting. And at night, if it's your turn, you're sitting up to do fire watch, looking out at the ridge, one ridge over, two ridge over, three ridges over, where it is coming from, to make sure it doesn't flare up in the middle of the night and take everyone by surprise. It is beautiful. I have a little poem about that, which was not on our list of things we were going to talk about, but it's very short.
No,
And,
please.
it's a poem about the ethics of what I'm saying, because I know anybody who has lived through a forest fire and lost their house, lost their animal, lost, a friend, what I'm saying would be very distressing. So here is this very short poem, Sonoma Fire. So I live in Marin County. Sonoma is the next county north. Sonoma Fire. Large moon, the deep orange of embers, also the scent, the griefs of others, beautiful at a distance. And this is what a great deal of art is about. If you were the person living through a Greek tragedy, there might be no catharsis. It's not beautiful. There has been a war. Your brother has been killed. His body has been left out to be eaten by the carrion birds. That is not beauty. And yet, over the distance of time and art, we can step into the unbearable circumstance. And as with meditation training, you can live through it and survive. And I think that teaches you, if you do it over and over and over again, um, it teaches you a little more confidence in your ability to bear the unbearable and survive, in your ability to live in uncertainty and not have to find an answer so quickly. All of these things, and it's not even, it's not only the making of art, it is the receiving of the art of others. All these things are instructions in how to become larger as human beings. And that is always what I have wanted. I have always wanted a larger heart, a larger set of possibilities, a larger sense of connection, a larger perspective, all those things. That is the path of Zen, and it is the path of art.
Jane, I know you resist labels. I've even heard you say you don't even like to be called a poet, certainly not a Zen poet. But I'm going to lay another label on you right now. You, like it or not, you have become one of the wise elders. And I hope that you've already started this, but I hope you give us a little solace today because we are living in a really kind of scary time, a difficult time where this is the first interview I've done since the election, and I think the first time you've spoken since the election. So let's dive into some of your poetry that might help us deal with this time of uncertainty. Okay, so when you were saying that that fire was beautiful, it reminded me of the kerosene moment in Let Them Not Say. And can we start there? I think we couldn't come up with a more appropriate poem for today, um, although we've chosen quite a few here. But let's start with Let Them Not Say, if you don't mind. Can you read that for us?
Can I say a little bit about it first? I
Please
think
do,
that might
please.
help people. So the poem, Let Them Not Say, it was written in 2014 with the crisis of the biosphere in mind. And I always say crisis of the biosphere rather than climate change because it is more than climate change. It is also extinctions. It is toxins. There are many parts of what is happening. And I like to acknowledge all of the beings, the living sphere, the biosphere, that are affected also beyond us. So that was its original intention of address, direction of address. But the poem was published first. I felt like it was a poem that had work to do. And so it was first published on the day, the first time that our coming I just even, I'm reluctant to say the phrase, but the first time that the president who was about to come again, it was published on his inauguration day. And so it entered the world as a political poem and went pretty viral. But what I had in mind, which fits, any crisis, any of our current crises, I'm thinking about the future. The future will know how things turned out. They will know in 100 years, did we navigate this crisis of Earth and this crisis of social compact and justice and equality and economics? Did we get through it? Did we figure it out? And so the poem is imagining the future, looking back on us and knowing how it turned out. And it is a poem which hopes by its own existence to help contribute to its own erasure. That someday someone would read this poem and say, why was she so worried? She didn't have to be. Okay.
Yes.
Let them not say. Let them not say we did not see it. We saw. Let them not say we did not hear it. We heard. Let them not say they did not taste it. We ate. We trembled. Let them not say it was not spoken, not written. We spoke. We witnessed with voices and hands. Let them not say they did nothing. We did not enough. Let them say, as they must say something, a kerosene beauty, it burned. Let them say we warmed ourselves by it, read by its light, praised, and it burned. Now, in the monastery, there was no electricity, and back in the mid 1970s, there were no solar panels, and so we lived by kerosene. That was what we had for light. We had no heat. We didn't even have glass on the windows in those days. In winter, you'd put up plastic, and in summer, there were screens. And I have contributed not only then, but all my life to the problem. I am not innocent. I am not innocent. And I wanted both to acknowledge the crisis, acknowledge the problem, but also acknowledge that we human beings, we want to read, we want to be warm, we want to travel and see our relatives, we want to do all kinds of things. And you cannot only condemn this mammalian wish for comfort, for light in the dark, for the ability to read late at night if you're awake. That is not the solution. Don't ask me what the solution is. But I wanted to include my complicity, and I wanted to include how beautiful those kerosene lamps were. They also warmed the cabin up a little bit. That was nice too.
Yeah. And kerosene's been used to cook food to eat.
Of course.
I remember Coleman Barks was leading some discussion with Mary Oliver years ago, and one of the things he said that sticks with me, he said, I have a hard time saying anything about Mary's poems because every line when I read them, I just say, yes, 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 yes. And so I really don't have much to say other than yes. And I have to tell you, I was reading, first time I read that poem of yours, I'm reading along saying, yes, yes, yes. And then the kerosene line came, and it was jarring to me. It was that moment of surprise that you talk about in one of your essays, in 10 Windows. It was that moment of, what is the title of that?
Well, you're either thinking of the essay Poetry in the Constellation of
That's it.
Surprise,
Yeah.
thinking of the essay about windows in poetry, which is when a poem suddenly turns and looks in a different direction.
Yeah. And that was so interesting to me, and I didn't get it. It really bothered me for a while. Why is she bringing up kerosene here? But I get it now. I get it now. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. It's for me, it is such a natural image to arise. And if you could see a little further over to the side, you would see two kerosene lanterns still on a windowsill in case of power outage. Although now I have many more rechargeable things and solar powered, not my whole house, but I have a little battery thing with a solar panel you can put on it. But I know your listeners, our listeners have many different backgrounds and many different interests. But one of the things coming at this from a sort of craft point of view is sometimes you have to be willing to baffle your readers rather than over-explain. And, in songwriting, this is so much easier because people don't hold song lyrics to the same comprehensibility standard that you hold print or spoken words, unless the spoken words have moved over to the realm of music, and then people understand that the driving axle of what's being said is sound and music. So there are poets who work more over in hip hop and rap poetry. That freedom to not make sense is much more given by the context. But even a straight page poet like me, I'm willing to ask people to work a little. And if the image that they don't understand um, is also a bit of a magnet, maybe they'll get there,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? Or
Yeah.
maybe they'll just skip over their incomprehension because after all, we human beings are very used to leading incomprehensible lives. The world does not come with a linear rationale or recipe.
Yeah. Yeah. And those, if you stick with it, those moments end up maybe being the most powerful moments too.
Yeah, people do remember that kerosene beauty line.
And
Yeah.
now I want to ask you if you don't mind to skip to a cedary fragrance, and I have a reason why. Our time is just going so fast here, and I knew it would. And there's one thing that I want to ask your advice about, so to speak,
Okay.
and it will come directly out of a cedary fragrance. Would you mind reading that one for us?
Yeah. And it's the perfect segue because what it is thinking about
Yeah.
is those years at Tassajara, because
Right.
we also had no hot water in the cabins. So a cedary fragrance. Even now, decades after, I wash my face with cold water, not for discipline, nor memory, nor the icy awakening slap, but to practice choosing to make the unwanted wanted.
Yes. Yes. And I have two questions about that. Just it's so beautiful. Thank you for that. Uh, One, this comes from, let's see, this comes from your book, Given Sugar, Given Salt, right?
Yes.
That's one of the few I don't have. But I do have this Life of Poetry that you recently published. You can't say you're not a poet when you publish a book like this, by the way. And one of the things I noticed is the sequence the same in that original. Does identity come after a cedary fragrance?
Well, I can't tell you that from memory, but I can say that when I did this, so the asking that you were just holding up is a new and selected poems, which means there's about 30 new poems at the start, and then it takes, some poems from each of the prior 9
Sure.
books. And when I made the selections, I realized I did have to reorder things because the something might have been in between 2 poems. So I took all of the poems that I ended up picking and I did reorder them. So I can't answer your question without going into the other room and finding that book, which has a very beautiful cover, by the way. Given Sugar, Given Salt is
Okay.
one of my favorite covers.
Well, I like this cover as well, by the way.
Oh, I love this cover. Thank you.
Well, the reason I ask, a little bit of minutia, but I think it's so cool that a cedary fragrance starts off even now, decades after, and identity starts off decades after.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a little echo there. Okay, here's the question I wanted to ask you. I understand choosing to make the unwanted wanted. And this is really, we could probably say it's Buddha 101, right? But help me here. I understand accepting. Right now, I accept the fact that the election went the way it went and that we're in for probably some difficult times, some of us, maybe all of us. I
All of us.
and I'm working to accept that and not fight it and not let it make me miserable. But to me, accepting is different than wanting.
Ah.
You're implying there, and it's just a cold water to the face. It's nothing dramatic, but you're implying that we not only want to accept all things, but to make the unwanted wanted. And should we make some of the things in this cruel world of ours wanted?
So that goes back to, and I'm not saying it's the source of it, but a predecessor expression of this is Nietzsche's phrase amor fati, the love of fate, the love of your fate.
Mm.
And I have there's another poem in the book which has Amor Fati as its title. Many, many people have written poems with the title Amor Fati. And what that phrase, you know, the love of your fate, is saying is whatever your life is, want your life. So it's not so much the kind of wanting that I hear you questioning, but is the kind of wanting of saying, whatever my life brings me, yes, it is worth it. And I have any number of poems because, you know, this is a hard idea to hang on to. Like anyone else, I can be, you know, dashed against the rocks and just fall into abyss. But if you were going to then open your eyes the next morning and take another step and go back to the bodhisattva path of practicing not only for your own well-being, but for the well-being of all beings down to the last blade of grass, you must say yes. So that's what I mean by wanted. I mean the saying yes. And here's a little side tidbit that I love. So long ago now, the consummately great writer Barry Lopez and I were asked to do a panel at a literary festival. And the director of the festival sent us a title. And we loved the idea of the panel, but neither of us liked the title. We come from very different spiritual backgrounds. And the topic of it was, you know, connected to the spiritual life. So Barry and I had a 45-minute phone call trying to figure out what title would sit well for both of us. And the problematic word was, I forget if it was spiritual or sacred that was problematic. But we tried many, many words, and we ended up both agreeing to the word numinous as a holder of this idea of whatever it is. You know, for me, divinity didn't work. For him, you know, emptiness certainly wouldn't work. Most people would have no idea, you know, what that slight mistranslation of a word that might better have been spaciousness signals in Zen practice. But numinous is marvelous, not least because it sounds a lot like luminous. And so, you know, the underlying sense that there is a radiance to existence. But when I looked it up after the phone call was over, I'm always interested in etymologies, and I looked up the etymology of numinous, and it comes from a word which means the physical act of nodding, of saying yes. So that is what I mean by making the unwanted wanted, finding a way to say yes to the difficult, which after all sometimes leads us to new directions. You know, it was hard for me when my college boyfriend said I wasn't welcome to join him on the trip to South America. But how different my life would have been if I had not been left on my own to hunt out by myself what my future was going to look like.
Well, we're certainly going to be challenged over these next 4 years. But we're up to it. We're up to it. But there's so many directions I could go here. One direction would be to just ask you to read some of your poems. Let's maybe spend just a minute, take a little sidebar here and talk about, you mentioned songwriting earlier. And maybe because a lot of my guests are singer-songwriters and or musicians, let's talk about music a little bit and maybe the intersection with poetry and songwriting. Again, you've already started talking about that a little bit. What were you listening to growing up in those days in '74?
Oh, well, during Zen practice, nothing, because we weren't allowed to.
But in that van, in that drive from New York to San Francisco.
Oh, well, I will say that I do not deserve the honor of the label Deadhead but I really loved the Grateful Dead.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
I heard them when I was, I heard them when they were still playing college gymnasiums. I heard Bonnie Raitt when she was still playing, a small club in Philadelphia when her first album just came out. And Bonnie Raitt has been a companion to me all of my life. Her music has been an abiding companion. But I grew up just listening to what was on the radio. So, I think the first album that I bought and chose for myself was Judy Collins.
Hmm.
The song Bird on a Wire has been in my consciousness forever.
Okay.
Um, you know, uh, Janis Ian, who has now become a friend. I just saw her. We were in Kentucky celebrating that she has given her archives to the amazing college, Berea College. And I got to be at that and contribute to it a tiny bit. And she's gone on. When I was young, you're just enough younger than me that maybe you didn't hear Society's Child when it first came out, but
Mhm.
I did.
Mhm.
And this was a poem about interracial dating. Nothing one heard was anything like it. And she has kept that strand of making, you know, gorgeously memorable songs of stories that connect to social justice from then until now.
Yeah.
I think there's a great continuity, but yeah, so it was the early rock music. Certainly, I cut my teeth on all of that,
Mhm.
but also the singer-songwriters.
Joni,
Oh, Joni forever.
Leonard
Um,
Cohen.
of course, and Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and
Yeah, Bob Dylan. And I wonder how do you think about the big controversy that he won the Nobel? How did that sit
all
with you?
right, I'm going to give you an honest answer. When it first happened, I was completely in favor of it. I thought it was great. I thought it was magnificent. And then shortly after, within maybe a month or two after, the book of his collected song lyrics came out. And on the page, I changed my mind.
Mm.
It's a terrible thing to say, but it is that difference between reading things on the page and hearing them in what is brilliant on the voice and on the music. On the page, I suddenly began seeing, you know, cliches and archaic inversions and all kind of things that, I sort of looked at and went, oh, if I saw this in a poetry workshop, I would
Yeah,
I would not be happy.
yeah,
They are different genres.
sure,
And I think we need
sure.
to allow things to be great in their own frame and fullness. He wasn't writing them for the
Right,
page. He was writing
right.
songs.
Frankly, his book of, I guess you'd call it poems, Tarantula, was not so great either,
Yeah.
in my opinion. Well, but poetry comes from a tradition of spoken word and
No, it comes from a tradition of songs.
of song.
Every
Yes.
language all over the world, the word for poem includes. So I write lyric poetry. That's because in ancient Greece, all poems were sung to the lyre.
Mhm.
The early word for poetry in Chinese is song. Human beings began singing poems,
Mhm.
and it was only later that those traditions uh, sometimes frequently departed from one another.
Mhm.
But they are the DNA of needing to find an expression for what it is you are meeting in this moment, whatever it is your life has given you. And expressing it allows you to feel it differently, communicate it to another person so they can feel it as well, share experience, create experience. Many courtships have been conducted by love poems.
Yes.
This is they are again, I'll say left foot and right foot of one source, one need.
Mhm. And it's interesting thinking about it in the opposite way. I hadn't thought about this, but I've tried to put poems to music, and that doesn't work out too well a lot as well. They are very different, though they come out of the same tradition, and I suspect part of that has to do with Gutenberg and the printed page. It started moving in different directions at that point, right?
Well, I'm going to say earlier, I'm going to say literacy,
Okay.
writing,
Okay. Fair
because
enough.
what
Yeah.
writing let you do, songs help you remember the words, rhyme and meter keep words in place and memorable. In the earlier book of essays, Nine Gates, there's a whole chapter about orality and literacy and how all of the strengths of poetry go back to orality. But once writing arrives, poetry begins to do a number of other things as well,
Yeah.
as does thought itself.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I love that old, um, was it Graham Greene, I believe, who said, "How do I know what I think until I see what I say?"
Yeah,
Love that.
exactly.
Well, maybe you should read Three-Legged Blues since we're talking about this intersection of
Yeah.
music, and it does make me think of Elizabeth Bishop's One Art, by the way.
Oh,
If that makes sense to you or not. But
oh, it does. I never thought of it. Oh, of course, because it's got losing in it. Yeah.
yes,
Of course it would. Luckily for me, I have a terrible memory because if you remembered all the great poems ever written, you would never have any reason to write your own. And you would start to write a poem with the word losing in it, and you go, oh, I can't possibly do that because
right.
Elizabeth Bishop has done it incomparably.
Yes.
Um, so just to prepare people, because you have an informed audience here, even the title is Three-Legged Blues because the poem is in its feeling, it is a blues, but in its prosody, it is a waltz. So the meter you're going to hear is a waltz meter and not a blues meter. Three-legged blues. Always you are given one too many, one too few. What almost happens doesn't. What might be lost, you'll lose. The crows will eat your garden. Weeds will get what's left. Your cats will be three-legged. Your house's mice be blessed. One friend will take your husband, another wear your dress. No, it isn't what you wanted. It isn't what you choose. Your floors have always slanted. Your roof has paid its dues. Life delivered you a present, a too small pair of shoes. What almost happened won't now. What can be lost, you'll lose. So I think of that as my chipper little poem of devastation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun in its devastation, though, and yeah, I know we have chosen poems here sort of with a theme, but I'm getting the more I read you and talk to you, the more I'm thinking these are threads that run through all of your work.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So, for me, this business of saying yes to what's hard to say yes to runs, it is not the only thing. I have other topics, but it is an abiding topic.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's see. I I guess I'm going to ask you if you don't mind to read The Difficult Day. Uh, Another one for me that I had that moment of yes, yes, yes. Oh, and that was the
Mhm.
line at the end with the rock. But let
Oh, thank you.
yeah,
Thank you.
let me just, if you don't mind, read that and we can talk about it a little bit.
Okay. Mind. Whoever minds being asked to sing a song or recite. The difficult day. Looking through the difficult day to see the mountain, I heard, through? No, you are making an error. Whose voice this ontological protest? The days? The mountains? Some distant piano or hawk? I couldn't tell. only that it stepped between suffering and suffering, like a rock going through a window before it has broken. So, this is you've asked me to read a poem that I don't think is easy to get on a single hearing. It's different, on a page. If you don't know what ontological means, you can look it up. You can tell that, the sentence through, no, you are making an error. That's in italics, which I tried to do with my voice.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a strange poem. It's one of the new ones. Which means it was written since all of our days did become more difficult.
Mhm.
So what was your particular thing
Well,
you'd like to talk about
and
with?
I hate to be like a new critical critic and ask you to explicate your poem, but let me find that. What page? That's 22.
22. And
Yeah,
the new critics one would not ask the author to explicate her
that's
poem.
true. That's
The
true.
author is the least informed about what she's actually saying.
Right, right, right. Uh, I'm one of the things that I feel here when we're troubling with this word through is time. So we have sight. We're looking through a day to these mountains, and maybe whether it's the mountain or the day's voice or whoever that's this ontological protest, you've got the preposition wrong. It's not through. It's in. Perhaps you are in the day as you see the mountains. So it's something about time there, but I'm troubled by the rock going through the window before it is broken.
Oh,
And again, you don't have to explain that because it's such a one of the things that it made me think of those slow motion videos of something
yeah,
breaking. Is
yeah.
that kind of what you had in mind there?
Absolutely. And also it's just straight surrealism.
Ah,
It's
yeah.
saying something that isn't possible and making an image that we can feel and grasp and take in, even though it is surreal, which means, no, doesn't happen in the actual world. Um, it is I will be the first to say it is a very odd poem, but I liked it. And
Me
one thing
too.
that happens, after at a certain point, if you like a poem, even if no magazine ever takes it, you can put it in your book and no one's going to tell you not to. I can't remember if this one was magazine published or not. I'd have to look up the credits, but yeah, I like its strangeness. And it really did, I don't want to sound like I'm hallucinating, but it actually did happen. It was a difficult day. When
Mm,
I wake up, the mountain is outside my window. I looked at it and I thought, looking through the difficult day. And as soon as I wrote that down, because I understood that I was, in poem writing condition at that point, I literally heard my interior voice saying, through?
mm,
No, that's not right. You're not looking through it. You are, just as you said, in it. So,
yeah.
yeah.
And we're running out of time here, and I wish we could spend 3 hours. But is there a typical process for you that drives these poems? For a lot of us, it's one line that'll come, and we'll start building from there. Others, it's a phrase we hear, or it's that ontological voice that suddenly speaks to us. But and I suppose some people just sit down and work hard until it comes. I can't imagine doing that. But Guy Clark used to do that, by the way. He used to have an office, and he would lay on the couch in that office and not come home until he'd written a song that day, or at least a partial song. I can't imagine it doing that way. What is your process, or is there a typical process?
So there is a typical process, but it's not the only process. So I have written different poems in different ways, and nobody reading them would be able to tell which is which. But typically, it is what you named. I will have an almost physical sense, or a truly physical sense. Ah, a poem is here. And the speaking of our continual chatter of inner monologue changes its quality. I hear some words and I know, okay, you need to get these down because I don't have a good enough memory to compose a poem without writing. And I don't want to spend my time trying to remember the first line when I'm working to find the 15th line. So I just, write however I can, pen and pencil. I used to use a typewriter. I'll write on the computer sometimes. For me, I know real artists always write by hand, but I guess I'm not a real
Do
artist
you
because
ever allow this guy to come
no,
into?
I can't type on something that small. I'm too. I'm
You
not
can
a quick
speak into it.
typer on.
You can
Oh
speak.
no, I don't. I don't do it audio, and I can't quite say why.
Hmm.
A few poems that have, especially, no, this is rarely noticed, but I actually do have poems which are written with rhyme and meter as the driving axle. They are prosodically arrived at.
Mhm.
And I always know as soon as I write them, oh, this one has sound as the driver. And those poems, I sometimes, especially as I'm continuing to work on them, sometimes I will be out, doing my little dog trot of an exercise thing in the local trails and streets. And they will come back to me and I will start reciting them in my head and I will begin hearing changes I need to make. And then it is this desperate act of, do I keep going and keep making more changes, or how quickly can I get home before I forget them all? And so, it is sometimes your process is just a factor of your faculties, but mostly I begin to hear a voice speak. I have no idea what it's going to say more often than not. I begin to write, and a first draft usually, but not always, arrives. And then I move right into revising, changing, seeing if there's a place I went awry, a place I stopped too early, an ending I haven't found yet. And then I will keep working over time. Some poems have been written, in only a few minutes. Some have been written over 6 months.
Mm.
And again, I'm not sure anyone but me would know which is which.
How do you know when it's done? How do you know it's complete?
I am a great believer in time as an editor. And again, my poor memory helps me with this because I walk away from the poem and I forget it. And then I come back and I read it again and I can see it more clearly. I can see when something isn't right or something isn't there yet. And I revise. And I keep doing that over increasing periods of time. So 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months. One poem, 35 years. I changed it for putting it in this book, but I changed it about something that I'd gone back and forth on when I first wrote it. I just never could decide. And I finally was quite sure I had it right and published it that way in its first book, which was different from its first magazine. And with all that happened in the ensuing decades, when I went to put it in this book, I changed it back because
Wow.
I knew how the story had turned out and I wanted it the other way.
I think Walt Whitman taught us that it's okay to keep revising these poems.
Oh, Walt Whitman did, and Auden did, the painter Bernard, uh, the writer, Bill Knott, just you name it. There's Galway Connell used to revise his poems while he was speaking them at a poetry reading. He'd say so, he'd actually stop and cross it out on the page and say something new. Um, you know, we we have more perspective. Some people, when they come out with a new and selected poems, they make a great many changes. I made as few as I could bear,
Mm.
because I thought the poems need to be what they were when they came in the world. They need to have been written by the person who wrote them and not this person, decades older. My job is to write new poems now.
Mm. Sometimes when I write a song, even if I've recorded it, and I think it's done, what drives me to revise it is performing it live because
Oh, yeah.
I hear it differently. Does that happen to you when you?
Absolutely. Yes. You
Yeah.
you hear you can hear people hearing you.
Yeah.
And it's not a matter of them going, oh, or not going, oh, or
Right.
ah, or not going, ah. Sometimes you hear something and you can hear, oh, they're not getting that.
Yeah.
But as a writer whose work mostly lives on the page, I give lots of readings. I love giving readings, and I feel like giving a poem aloud is its own destination. It's not a way to seduce someone into writing a book. If they've heard it, they've received it. But every once in a while, um, I will have something that I know isn't being heard well, but I truly trust that with the time of the page and being able to reread, it's worth keeping. So I'm not only writing for the response in an auditorium. And I feel like that allows me to be stranger. And I have wanted since after the first book that is still available, which is actually my second book of poems. Um, when I when I finished that book and it came out, I looked at it and I went, these poems are good, but I would like to be more strange. I would like to be weirder. I didn't want to write the same kind of lyric poem, even if it was good. I wanted to surprise myself more,
Mm.
challenge myself more, allow more freedom. People can like the poems or not like the poems. Some will, some won't. And, any of your listeners, because I know you're only just starting to move into poets rather than all singer-songwriters, and I give you complete permission. Love the poets you love and don't read the poets you don't.
Yeah.
It's not, nobody's taste in music is identical. Nobody loves every single song with equal passion, even by a person whose work you do love. And the other small asterisk I'll put on that is if it's somebody who many, many, many people love, look at it again in 5 years, because sometimes your taste expands, your life changes, what you need changes.
Mhm.
So I will, confess the embarrassing thing that, when I was a young person and Elizabeth Bishop's collected poems first came out, um, I didn't understand what everybody was so excited about. I didn't hear it. I didn't see it. And a few years later, I looked again and she became one of the abiding favorite poets in my pantheon of poets.
Yeah.
So, give yourself permission to change also.
Terrific advice. Jane, I can't believe our time is up. I want to ask you to choose. You don't have to choose one of the other poems that we identified, but you can. Will you choose one poem to take us out to finish
Yeah.
this, if you don't mind? Oh, that's
So
right.
you're giving me too much leeway to
Well,
think
if you want
about
me
whether.
to, I can recommend one.
Why don't we do I open the window? Um, as no, yeah, I hear a silence. What were
No,
you?
no, that's good.
Okay.
Very consistent with
Yeah.
our themes
So
today.
I opened the window. I think, I don't know how long it is between our taping this and it going out into the world, but I think it's a poem that speaks to how many of us feel in this moment. So I opened the window. What I wanted wasn't to let in the wetness. That can be mopped. Nor the cold. There are blankets. What I wanted was the siren, the thunder, the neighbor, the fireworks, the dog's bark. Which of them didn't matter? Yes, this world is perfect, all things as they are. But I wanted not to be the one sleeping soundly on a soft pillow, clean sheets untroubled, dreaming there still might be time, while this everywhere crying. So that is a poem of rededicating ourselves to um, continuing however we can to try to help. What else can we do?
Jane Hirshfield, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time, and I appreciate you so much. I admire you, and I feel lucky to have spent this time with you. I wish you all the best.
And I you, John, and thank you for all the attention you've brought to my poems and your invitation to speak with you, and all the preparation you brought to it, but mostly just the chance to be together, and talk and feel. Yes, we do have one another's backs. We really do, and the world is never entirely lost.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.